let's do a deep dive on culture vultures throughout the 21st century. Go! According to Urban Dictionary, a culture vulture is a person or organization making profit using unhonorable practices off of a culture that they do not care for. Basically, there's nothing wrong with being influenced by a culture that isn't yours, but when you use said culture to elevate yourself and then distance yourself once that goal is accomplished, that makes you weird. Compare the examples that I list to artists like Eminem, Amy Winehouse, Mac Miller, and Robin Thicke, and hopefully you'll be able to see the difference. With that out the way, let's start with a true vulture of the culture, Hannah Montana. Miley Cyrus will become a pop culture phenomenon in the late 2000s through her popular Disney TV show, Hannah Montana. The young teenage star would dominate American media. Everything from music, movies, merch, and even video games would be produced by this one single entity. With Disney carefully crafting her image, she would be a role model for young children and teenagers, and this would translate into hit singles like The Climb and Party in the USA. But as she ventured into adulthood, she would begin to receive criticism for having a much more mature-like image, gaining backlash for doing a slightly revealing photo shoot with Vanity Fair in 2010. Though her 2010 album Can't Be Tamed would begin her venture into being considered a more serious artist, she would completely shed her identity in 2013. And how would she do that? Through black people. Cyrus would collaborate with Mike Will and release the highly successful breakout album, Bangers. This was completely different from anything she had ever created before, using trap, hip-hop, and R&B elements in her records, and collaborating with various hip-hop heavyweights like Future, Juicy J, and Big Sean. But the most notable change was not in the music, but her public persona. Miley would use black culture as a form of self-discovery, ditching the long hair for short and wearing much of the popular black fashion of the day, grills, Jordans, and snapbacks. That is when she was wearing clothes, because during a large portion of this run, she wore next to nothing in public. When you're young, you're often looking to find yourself, but it can't be avoided that she was getting rewarded for doing what black people, and especially black women, are criticized for to this day. Take, for instance, when she twerked on Robin Thicke at the 2013 VMAs. Media outlets would state that Cyrus invented twerking, despite the fact that black women had been twerking for decades prior and objectified for it. Give Miss Twerk something her flowers. But she was absolutely a part of black culture before this, like that time that she was dropping bars on Hold Down, Throw Down. Or when she shouted out Jay-Z on Party in the USA. Or when the Migos made Hannah Montana. In hindsight, and cultural appropriation aside, Bangers was not a good album in my opinion. Outside of the singles, one of the best examples of trying too hard and black scenting. A black scent is a manner of speaking indicative of a stereotypical African American, or someone trying to sound like one. But my personal opinion does not really matter, because this album was huge, going triple platinum and having huge singles like We Can't Stop and Wrecking Ball. But I still stand on the opinion that this was merely a phase, largely evidenced in the fact that she would be much more calm and civilized in interviews, and then rev it up when she was on stage and at public appearances. Despite criticism from black people, she would continue much of her antics for over a year, lighting one up at the 2013 EMAs and even hosting the 2014 VMAs clad in Bambi braids. The 2014 VMAs was also the night when being black got too real, because that night she would be pressed by Nicki Minaj live on stage. And now back to this bitch that had a lot to say about me the other day in the press. Miley, what's good? From then on, the persona would fall. In 2017, she would publicly renounce her affiliation with hip-hop through an interview with Billboard. I can't listen to that anymore. That's what pushed me out of the hip-hop scene a little. It was too much Lamborghini, got my Rolex, got a girl on my... I'm so not that. In the end, Bangers would allow Miley Cyrus to shed her good girl Disney image and be taken more seriously by music critics. But it came at the cost of taking from black people without giving a whole lot back. But to Miley Cyrus's credit, she would fully atone for her culture vulturing years later. In a 2019 video, she would state, I cannot change what I said at that time, but I can say I am deeply sorry for the disconnect my words caused. Simply said, I fucked up and I sincerely apologize. Then she did a song with Beyonce, so there's that. Real good of her to acknowledge her decisions. Culture vultures usually have a habit of apologizing when it's way too late and the damage has already been done. Take, for instance, my favorite culture vulture, Justin Timberlake. Some people will be hesitant to call him a full-blown culture vulture because of the fact that he's built his career off of working with several other black people and has a genuinely good catalog. But despite the fact of me knowing that he'll probably never want to speak to me if he ever watches this video, I can't avoid the facts. Justin Timberlake would establish himself as one half of the clean-cut and insanely successful boy band NSYNC. But after the breakup of the group, he would turn out to be its breakout star, shattering all expectations with the release of his debut studio album, Justified. It's generally labeled as a pop album, but in my opinion, it's really just slightly less gritty R&B, and it had major hits. Add that Timberland and the Neptunes carried this album, and yes, there's some black shit. It also helps that he had help practicing with his black scent. In her 2023 autobiography, former girlfriend Britney Spears recalls an incident in which he laid it on really thick. Oh yeah, faux shiz, Genuine, what's up, homie? Timberlake's foray into creating black music was largely successful, and the music spoke for itself. But then one night in 2004 would change all perception in hindsight. R&B and pop sensation Janet Jackson would be selected to perform at that year's Super Bowl halftime show, along with Timberlake, Diddy, Nelly, Kid Rock, and Jessica Simpson. After an amazing medley of hits, Jackson would bring out Justin Timberlake to close out the set with his hit record, Rock Your Body. Their performance was meant to end with Timberlake ripping off a piece of Janet's clothing, revealing a red lace bra. But Timberlake would slip up and accidentally rip off her entire chest piece, revealing her nude breast on live network television. With millions watching at home, the backlash was unavoidable. The FCC would fine CBS $550,000 for the debacle, and Jackson and Timberlake would separately apologize for their actions. Fun fact, this is the reason that YouTube was created. Its three founders would state that they were so frustrated about not being able to find a clip of this online that they would create this website in protest, and the rest is history. But while Timberlake would be able to leave this incident largely unscathed and able to continue the rest of his career, Jackson would be blackballed for several years. Being removed as a presenter at that year's Grammys, losing out on a Lena Horne film, and much of her music being far less successful than before. And it's here where you can call Justin Timberlake's culture vulturism into question, because he did absolutely nothing to defend Janet, despite the fact that it was he who made the mistake on television. Shortly before the release of his second album, he would do an interview with MTV and admit that she bore the brunt of the ire from public media over what happened. Quite convenient. Timberlake would continue his career with two more highly successful albums, Future Sex Love Sounds and The 2020 Experience. He would also have a successful foray into acting. But that universal love would come to a halt in 2016. Actor Jesse Williams would accept an award at that year's BET Awards, and in his speech would call for an end to police brutality and Hollywood using black talent while not giving them the same level of recognition. Timberlake would tweet about this moment and state that he was inspired. Clearly not saying that he fit the mold of the same people that Williams was criticizing, he would be called out by journalist Ernest Owens. So does that mean you're gonna stop appropriating our music and culture and apologize to Janet too? Timberlake would respond in a way that any rational person would. Oh, you sweet soul. The more you realize that we are the same, the more we can have a conversation. Bye. Basically, all lives matter. It's at this point where many of his fans turned on him, and the masses would label him a full-blown culture vulture. And matters would be made even worse when Britney Spears would finally be released from her conservatorship. Facing backlash for their failed relationship, Timberlake would release a public statement and finally apologize to Janet Jackson 17 years after the Super Bowl incident. 17 years later, when she needs it the least. It's undeniable that Justin Timberlake votes that culture with ease, but damn it, he made signs. Some people still do, however, question if he's a full-blown culture vulture or more so an artist that appreciates various cultures within his art. Somebody similar to Gwen Stefani. Gwen Stefani would begin her career as the lead singer of the punk and ska band No Doubt, having their biggest success in the 90s and early 2000s. Basically, Stefani was the quintessential cool, rebellious punk rock girl of the 90s, and we all loved her. But even then, there were elements of vulturism in her public image. For instance, her wearing the bindi in many of the group's public appearances. If you don't know, a bindi is a piece of jewelry that's often worn by Indian women and women of South Asian cultures, usually on the forehead. That's quite notable because Gwen is Italian and Irish. Her reasoning is actually rooted in her former relationship with her fellow bandmate Tony Kanal, an Indian man. Wearing the bindi was meant to express gratitude to both he and his mother. Very fair reasoning. However, she would criticize Madonna, a fellow culture vulture, of stealing her style at the 1998 VMAs. Pulling down that reasoning just a little bit, but I digress. Time would pass, and we would still collectively love Stefani, leading up to the release of her 2005 debut solo album, Love Angel Music Baby. Lamb was a fantastic debut album, filled with so many hits. Rich Girl, Holla Back Girl, Luxurious, Cool, list goes on. But music aside, the album was centered around the theme of Harajuku, a style that originates in Japan and highlights colorful hair, accessories, and culture. Stefani claimed that her fascination with Harajuku actually stemmed from her father coming back home from Japan and telling her about this culture when she was a child. But after visiting Japan with No Doubt on the 1996 tour, she would become completely mesmerized. But this will be further explored through the formation of the Harajuku Girls, 4 Asian backup dancers that would follow Stefani around through all of her appearances, more or less being a part of the album's rollout. We're talking performances, music videos, and red carpet appearances. This is extremely notable because the Harajuku Girls never spoke, ever, and that was what was instructed of them by Gwen. Gwen would refer to the girls as her imaginary friends and essentially created human accessories. And it goes deeper, creating clothes and fragrances called Harajuku, completely commercializing that culture. She would even go so far as to attempt to trademark the name Harajuku, rationalizing that she's the reason that Americans even know about it. Note, I am not Asian, so maybe I am not qualified to speak on whether or not this is culturally offensive, but what about coming from an actual Asian person? Take Asian comedian and actress Margaret Cho. In 2005, Cho would write an article that stated her distaste for Gwen's uses of Harajuku culture. I want to like them, and I want to think they are great, but I am not sure if I can. I mean, racial stereotypes are really cute sometimes, and I don't want to bum everyone out by pointing out the minstrel show. I think it's totally acceptable to enjoy the Harajuku Girls, because there are not many other Asian people out there in media really, so we have to take whatever we can get. Amos and Andy had lots of fans, didn't they? At least it's a measure of visibility, which is much better than invisibility. I am so sick of not existing that I would settle for following any white person around with an umbrella just so I could say I was there. Stefani would respond the following year in an article with Entertainment Weekly. The truth is that I basically was saying how great that culture is. It pisses me off that Cho would not do the research and then talk out like that. It's just so embarrassing for her. The Harajuku Girls is an art project. It's fun. Also a part of that album rollout was the music video Luxurious, in which she dressed like a Latina chola and Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. But after this moment, Stefani would live a relatively peaceful public existence and was still loved by fans and media. That is until 2012, when No Doubt would reunite and release the music video for their single, Kinda Hot. Stefani would appear in the music video dressed as a Native American woman and play a game of cowboys and Indians. This is especially notable because the song has absolutely nothing to do with cowboys or Native Americans. The reception was so poorly received that it would immediately be removed from their official music video channels and their upcoming tour would be canceled. So at this point, Stefani has lifted Indian, Japanese, Latino, and Native American cultures, leading us to today. Stefani is now married to Blake Shelton, a fellow musician who's been mired in controversy for many of his racist and homophobic comments throughout the years. These days, she's an ambassador for Hallow, an app that promotes Christian faith and prayer, and funded by current Vice President and champion of conservative views, J.D. Vance. I'll let you decide whether or not she's a full-blown vulture, but it is kind of ironic that she basically used up all the cultures out there and decided to go home to her own when it was finally said and done. It can also be noted that Stefani, like Timberlake, was far less successful when she decided to abandon profiting off of cultures that weren't hers. But one artist that's been successful as a former culture vulture and current user of their own culture is Post Malone. Post Malone would jump into the music scene as a full-fledged hip-hop artist through the release of his first single, White Iverson. The song was unquestionably hip-hop, and his image reflected that, being clad in braids, grills, and dad hats. This was so greatly calculated that many music goers questioned whether or not he was black or mixed race, further accentuated by his usage of the black scent. But it turns out that as good as his music was, he was nowhere close to having any origins to hip-hop. Post Malone began his career as a member of a metalcore band and cited that the majority of his influences lied in folk and country music. In finding clips from this era, he looks absolutely nothing like the image that brought him fame. But somewhere along the line, he would pivot into hip-hop, and that change is what launched him into success, achieving worldwide fame through songs like Rockstar and Psycho. Basically, his biggest hits were either straight rap or rap adjacent. But along the way of profiting off of rap music, he would take steps to distance himself from the genre, claiming that he was not a rapper during several interviews during that period, instead saying that he was an artist or an artist that happens to rap. It can be argued that what he was doing was equivalent to what black artists like Lil Uzi and Lil Yachty were doing during this period. But that distinction would turn into full-on condemnation after he sat down for an interview in 2017. If you're looking for lyrics, if you're looking to cry, if you're looking to think about life, don't listen to hip-hop. From here on, accusations of Malone being a culture vulture would grow, and this would be further exacerbated when old footage of him would leak saying the N-word. Post would use this criticism as fuel for publicity, claiming that he was speaking on rappers that do not have substance in their songs. Later on, he would claim that that criticism would pull him into a deep depression, and he would begin to start drinking heavily soon after, basically victimizing himself despite the fact he was being held accountable for valid criticism. Through it all, he would claim that this was simply who he was. But with each album that he would release, his music would stray further and further away from hip-hop. Fast forward to 2024, where Post would release his latest album, F1 Trillion. This album is 100% country, trading in features from 21 Savage and Roddy Ricch for features with Tim McGraw and Morgan Wallen, losing the nappy braids and grill for cowboy boots and cowboy hats. And with the massive success of F1 Trillion, the likelihood of him returning back to hip-hop culture is quite low. But to this day, Post defends his stance on using hip-hop to get noticed. He also dropped the black scent. But my opinion hardly matters, because like many of the other artists in this video, his success will not really be gauged by his past. But to hip-hop and black music fans especially, we will never forget. But who's your favorite culture vulture? Let me know in the comments.